Let us pray together again. As you came into the lives of unlikely and unsuspecting people long ago, O God, an old couple, a frightened teenager, so come to us. Come and awaken us, come and startle us again, come and open our hearts to your love in Jesus Christ. And to that end, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. A wise preacher warned that one liability of having heard the Christmas story over and over again is that we all know how it turns out. And since at least Thanksgiving, or depending on where you're shopping, Halloween, that's exactly where we've wanted to be, where it all turns out. Right there at the side of the sweet baby Jesus, lying in a manger where all is calm and all is bright. But instead, we've taken the long way home, or as we call it in the church, the Advent way home. We've journeyed alongside Jesus in an apocalyptic mood, and John the Baptist out in the wilderness crying, "You brood of vipers." And so though we entered today's text with a bit of anxiety, wondering what in the world we are getting into today, we breathe a collective sigh of relief when we see the name Mary. Mary, thank God. We know her, Mary, the mother of Jesus, that sweet, innocent, calm, lovely Virgin Mary we see in all the paintings and all the portraits. Thank goodness we're through the apocalyptic wilderness stories, finally someone who signals to us that Christmas is coming. Baby Jesus can only be a couple pages away now. It's all downhill from here. Famous last words. Because you see, rather than jumping straight to shepherds and angels and an innkeeper, Luke takes us home by another way, introducing us to what will soon enough be the Christmas narrative, but he introduces us to that narrative with a series of very human stories, and with a song that is anything but sweet and innocent and calm and lovely. As the Reverend John Buchanan recounts, the first story in the Gospel of Luke is about an elderly, childless couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth. When a messenger from God comes to tell him that his wife will conceive, old Zechariah can't and won't believe it. He is struck mute until his son John is born, giving Zechariah a 9-month pregnancy of his own in which to think things over. The second story in Luke is about a young relative of Elizabeth, Mary of Nazareth, who we know well. The messenger of God comes to her as well to announce that she, not married, will conceive. Her son will be the Son of the Most High, God's own Son. Mary is young and perplexed and afraid the neighbors will gossip. And what on earth is she supposed to tell her parents or her fiancé? So she visits Elizabeth, an older relative, perhaps an aunt, who is now 6 months along in her own unlikely and unexpected pregnancy. And Elizabeth, bless her heart, opens her home and her arms and her heart. She thinks Mary's embarrassing, awkward, and morally questionable condition is just wonderful. "Blessed are you among women, Mary," Elizabeth says to a frightened, marginalized adolescent. Every teenager needs an aunt like that, I think. The third story Luke tells to introduce Christmas is the story of Mary's response to all of this. New Testament scholar Beverly Gaventa says that after the emotional power of that moment when Mary is told by the angel, the moment she understands the mysterious and frightening thing that is happening to her, and after the amazing grace of Elizabeth's acceptance and affirmation and blessing, After all that, it's time for Mary to say something. And when Mary finds her voice, it is quite a song. We know it as the Magnificat. The ancient church sang it regularly. Benedictine monasteries still chant it every night. Johann Sebastian Bach put it to some of the most glorious music ever written, the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. The mighty one has done great things for me. And then there follows a list of great things that God has done, strong things, a list that doesn't make it into many Christmas greetings. God has scattered the proud, brought down the powerful from their thrones, filled the hungry, sent the rich away empty. According to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, this Song of Mary's is the oldest Advent hymn. It is at once the most passionate, the wildest, one might even say the most revolutionary Advent hymn ever sung. This is not the gentle, tender, dreamy Mary we sometimes see in paintings. This is the passionate, surrendered, proud, enthusiastic Mary who speaks out. This song, Bonhoeffer continues, has none of the sweet, nostalgic, or even playful tones of some of our Christmas carols. It is instead a hard, strong, inexorable song about collapsing thrones and humbled lords of this world, about the power of God and the powerlessness of humankind. Swelling with new life by the power of the Spirit and affirmed by her relative Elizabeth, Mary sings a song that proclaims God's gracious, effective compassion. It is more than any other woman gets to say in the entire New Testament. And it is quite a song, full of words you wouldn't expect from a young peasant girl, unexpectedly and unaccountably with child. These are words fit for a revolution, words fit for a political rally, words that can easily get preachers in trouble if they dare to say such things. God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Mary sings of a world she does not know, and yet she sings of these things as if they have already happened, as completed events. The mighty thrown down from their thrones, the humble lifted up, the rich sent away empty. We get confused because Mary seems to have a problem with her verb tenses. But as one scholar points out, this is because Mary, in this moment, is a prophet. Prophets almost never get their verb tenses right because part of their gift is being able to see the world as God sees it. And God sees this world far differently than you and I. Bishop Will Willimon tells about a conversation he had back when he was the dean of the chapel at Duke University. One day a student came to talk to him and said he was feeling distraught. He was losing his faith. And Willimon asked him some questions about the faith he had, about what kind of faith he thought he was losing. And eventually the student came out with it and said he had a problem. And the problem was the virgin birth of Jesus. He just couldn't accept it anymore. So at first, Willimon suggested he spend some time in the Gospel of Mark, because that gospel starts when Jesus is about 30, and there's nothing in it about Christmas at all. But the student protested, "Don't I need to believe the miraculous birth of Jesus in order to believe in Jesus? Don't I need to believe this miracle to be a Christian?" In one sense, no, Willimon answered, yet in another sense, yes. We ask you to believe in the virginal conception of Jesus, and if we can get you to swallow that without choking, then there's no telling what someone can get you to believe next. Come back next week. We'll try to convince you that the poor are royalty, that the rich are in big trouble, that God, not nations, rules the world, and on and on. We start you out with something small like the virgin birth, and then we work you up to even more outrageous assertions. God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Mary sings and sings and sings of the wildly absurd, outrageous, upside-down ways of God. Ways that do not make sense to our capitalistic, pull-yourself-up-by-your-bootstrap sensibilities, and yet ways that remind us of the power of God to overrule and tear down all the violence and hatred and injustice and evil of this world. Mary sings a song not of the world's justice, but of God's justice. Not of the world's love, but of God's love. Not of the world's mercy, but of God's mercy. And it is a justice and a love and a mercy that cares deeply and passionately about God's people. It is a justice and a love and a mercy that cares deeply and passionately about the conditions of people's lives and about those who are shut out and marginalized in this world. Mary sings this song to remind us that God cares deeply about people who in this plentiful world are hungry and homeless. God cares deeply about injustice and suffering and inequality in this world. God cares deeply about those who the world has pushed to the fringes of society. And Mary proclaims that God has not and will not forget them. Mary sings to remind us of the deep and abiding care of God. But that is not the only reason why Mary sings this song. As Martin Luther observed centuries ago, Mary sang this song not for herself alone, but for all of us to sing it after her, inviting us into relationship and partnership with God that we too might enter the struggle to build a just world, that we too might not forget those whom the world has forgotten. Mary invites us to sing. But if we are to sing this song of revolution alongside her, if we are to take seriously Mary's outrageous proclamation that God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts, God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly, God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. If we are to take this teenager seriously, then we, the ones who celebrate the birth of God's Son so intentionally, we ought to be permanently uncomfortable with the realities of poverty and homelessness in this world. We ought to be permanently uncomfortable with the reality that millions of our own children go to bed hungry every night, many of them living less than 2 miles from this church. We ought to be permanently uncomfortable with the reality that millions of American families live without adequate health care. We ought to be permanently uncomfortable with the fact that our economy continues to exacerbate and increase the gap between the rich and the poor. As we, beloved church, as we welcome the Christ child, we ought to be permanently uncomfortable with the state of this world in light of his mother's proclamation that God will fill the poor and send the rich away empty. Just imagine, writes Peter Dino, just imagine the world according to Mary's Magnificat. A heavenly banquet, and all the children fed. God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Luke indeed takes us home by another way, because Luke wants desperately to prepare our hearts to receive the one who is coming, the one who will live among us and declare that the first will be last and the last will be first, the one who will come to heal the dark and broken and forgotten corners of this world. Luke takes us home by another way because, like Jesus in an apocalyptic mood, like John the Baptist in the wilderness, Luke wants to make very, very sure that we know what we're getting ourselves into. That we know that this gospel truth proclaimed from the mouth of a young peasant girl is a truth that we are called to profess with our lives as well. Luke takes us home by another way, inviting us to sing as we journey toward Bethlehem. But before we sing sweet songs around a manger bed, Mary invites us into a song of revolution, a song of the wildly absurd, outrageous, upside-down ways of God in this world. Because if we're going to truly welcome the Christ child in our midst, we need to be ready to welcome the world that he will usher in. And so once again, as we continue our journey toward Bethlehem, the question becomes, do we know what we're getting ourselves into? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.